You are listening to the Prepared Warrior Podcast, where law enforcement and military trainers discuss cutting-edge training, tactics, and technology. Here is your host, John Wilson.
Welcome to Season 2, Episode 7 of the Prepared Warrior. I'm John Wilson. Our guest for this episode is Mike Taigman. I like to start every episode with a quote. This one is from Fred Shiro, who said, "I'm like a duck, calm above the water and paddling like hell underneath." All right, we have a special guest on the program. It's Mike Taigman. Mike teaches improvement science as an assistant adjunct professor in the University of California, San Francisco's Master of Science in Healthcare Administration, and interprofessional leadership, and as an adjunct professor in the Emergency Health Services Management Master's Degree program at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. He's shared his perspective in 48 of the 50 states, most of the Canadian provinces, Israel, Palestine, Australia, and throughout Europe. He is also a former law enforcement instructor with Caliber Press, the Justice Systems Training Institute, and COGA. Mike is the improvement guide for First Watch, helping partner organizations make meaningful improvements by organizing and leveraging their data. Thanks so much for joining me today, Mike.
Thank you for having me, John.
Now, currently the world is in the midst of a global pandemic, a disease outbreak that generations haven't seen for a long time. So there are obviously many additional issues law enforcement face through their day that would put them at risk to exposure to the virus COVID-19. So first question I got to ask before beginning a shift for the day, what is something those working in law enforcement can do to prepare themselves mentally, knowing they're risking exposure to this COVID-19?
That's an important question, and it's challenging in law enforcement when everybody else is told to stay home and shelter in place. Officers are out on the street and interacting with the public, and in many circumstances, it's impossible to maintain a 6-foot distance or to depending on what's going on, reliably keep your personal protective gear on. So I really encourage folks to have some type of instant relaxation tool that you can just kind of grab and activate whenever you need it, and reminding yourself of that before you go on your shift. So if you're somebody who likes tactical breathing, that's great. If you tend to know what part of your body holds stress, and you can move that around and shake it and relax it a little bit, and just remind yourself of that before you go on shift. And I'm aware that many law enforcement situations unfold very rapidly, but just reminding yourself that if it's possible to slow down and pretend a little bit when you're interacting with other people, pretend that you're either a surgeon in an operating room who needs to try to maintain a sterile field and avoid touching your face or anything with your hands, particularly after you've handcuffed somebody or wrestled a suspect under control. If you have a chance to wash your hands, yet be really diligent about not touching your face, and just because you've got gloves on, the virus can live on the outside of your gloves. Making sure you are attentive to not touching your face, and carrying hand sanitizer with you to wash yourself and wash your hands good frequently throughout the course of your shift. Those are some of the things that come to mind for both your stress management and protection against acquiring the virus yourself or bringing it home to your family.
Right. Yeah. And, law enforcement, they're used to being at risk while they're at work. Would you say this gives them an advantage in handling the stress that a lot of, regular people are also dealing with and maybe haven't faced, but I guess law enforcement has maybe a higher tolerance to this stress?
that's absolutely true. And it's not that there haven't been other infectious diseases that pose risk in addition to the risk of violence or motor vehicle crashes that are the ones that you commonly think of when it comes to law enforcement risk.
Right.
But that ability to be aware of potential threats in your environment, as a skilled law enforcement officer certainly have, and the ability to keep your cool in situations where other people tend to lose it, is hugely advantageous in protecting yourself both emotionally and from getting the disease during the course of your work.
And what can law enforcement do? As we said at the beginning, when they're going out, and it's their job to have to often get close with the general public and random strangers. What can they do, at home to assure their loved ones when there's not kind of a clear picture of the future?
Certainly, family, and however you define family, has all the normal stresses of life, the normal stresses of having somebody in law enforcement in their family, and praying that they will come home at the end of their shift, when they leave for the beginning of their shift, whether it's a night shift or a day shift or whatever it happens to be. Mm-hmm. I think there's reassurance in describing to your family members the actions that you intend to take in order to keep yourself safe, and to protect them from you bringing the virus home to them. I was talking with a patrol sergeant on the East Coast yesterday, whose wife is being treated for cancer and consequently has a suppressed immune system, and just his extra concern about not bringing the virus home to her, and just the precautions of he goes into the garage when he gets home, and he takes off his duty belt and his uniform in the garage, and bags the things that are washable up to take them right into the washing machine, and jumps into the shower before he interacts with his wife. And he's has kind of restricted their level of intimacy just as an extra precaution, as far as taking care of her and helping her be reassured that he's doing what he can to take care of himself, along with the reality and honest questions. Children particularly will ask those questions. Does it mean you're absolutely safe? The reality of our world is you can never promise absolute safety, and saying that honestly, and then following it up with, and that I will do absolutely everything I possibly can to protect myself and protect you as my family while I'm protecting and serving the public.
Yeah, that's very important, I think, to help those around you be have a clear mind that you don't know everything, but everything that you can do, you will do, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So for those working in a leadership role, say in a an agency of an essential service like law enforcement or military or something else, what do you think is even more important for them to keep in mind when they're leading all the people who are going out into the streets every day?
There's a concept in neuroscience. It's basically called the open loop nature of your limbic system, which, if you're not familiar with brain science, can sound a little odd. Basically, the limbic system is that part of your brain and mind that involves emotions, and emotions are contagious. If you've ever been in a room full of people and one person yawns, and you notice pretty soon several people yawn, that's kind of a manifestation of the impact that one person's emotions or experience can have on other people. And when you're in a leadership role, you have a higher impact on the emotions of the people under your command than you might realize. So, being aware that your own anxiety, fears, and whatnot around this particular situation are likely to show up in your facial expressions and your body language and your communication style. So just taking a quick second to kind of check it doesn't mean you suppress it, but being clear that your communication style and the emotions around it will affect the people on your team and underneath your command, and all that the work of law enforcement is just inherently stressful. Mm-hmm. And that this unseeable, trackable threat provides an extra level of kind of diffuse, kind of hard to contain stress for folks. So in with your officers and asking that question, how are you doing? And when somebody says I'm fine, realize that fine can stand for effed up, secure, and deep emotional, but I'm fine, and you're trying to hold it back a little bit, but just taking that extra second to really connect with folks and say, no, how are you really doing? How's your family doing through this? Do you need anything? And when it comes to people protecting themselves from stress, there are some unanticipated things that can. So when people are wearing, super aware of their hand hygiene and wearing their personal protective equipment, sometimes they will not eat adequately during the course of their shift because it's like, eating is a potential way to contaminate myself. So I'll go longer periods of time without eating effectively or not hydrating effectively. And eating and hydration are really important for, your cognitive capacity, your ability to be alert and safe when you're out working with the public. So as command staff, really reminding people to take the extra time to hydrate and eat, checking in with people about the quality of sleep they're getting when they're at home, and feeling like you've got permission to ask those questions. And then I know that personal protective equipment is a challenge in our country right now. There's some places that have adequate supplies, some places that are really low on it. A lot of it is really focused on the high risk healthcare providers, the paramedics in your community, and the emergency medicine professionals at the hospitals that really need the N95s and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But as a commander, doing your best to make sure that your folks have got protection around it, and being just extra of this that you normally pay attention to around depression, stress, anxiety, any flavors of post-traumatic stress disorder, any indications that somebody on your team might be feeling suicidal, those and just have an extra eye out for that, because this extra stress, particularly for this long period of time, puts us all at greater risk for that. And certainly the data shows that if you're working in emergency services, whether it's EMS, fire, or law enforcement, that we have a disproportionately high rate of PTSD and suicide issues, which isn't a surprise to any of your listeners than other professions. So we, as a leadership team in particular, being extra attentive to that during this time, I think, is really important.
You mentioned the buildup of tension that some people can have. Are there any good ways, healthy ways that people can release tension, if especially they're about to go, speak in front of their staff, or they have a leadership role and they want to to appear confident and calm when they're giving directives and things like that?
Absolutely. I mean, the stress response around that is, it's designed to the fight, flight, faint or freeze response is designed to either do battle or run away, neither of which are options when you're about to go interact with your team. So taking a moment and doing 3 or 4 tactical breathing breaths, and getting up and moving your body a little bit, even if it's just take a quick walk up and down the hall or around the building to get your body moving, and then remember that your presentation isn't about you; it's about the people under your command and your community, and stay really focused on the core. Which is, to protect and serve your community and to make sure your team members are safe and virus free, and that their stress is managed adequately, and keep that in your mind in all of your interactions and briefings.
Another thing related that for law enforcement, when they're dealing with the general public, should there be an expectation that maybe the general public might be more unpredictable or more difficult to manage with everything changing around them so fast?
There is no doubt that people who are on the edge because of emotional or psychological problems, or they are substance users, that those folks have higher reactivity and likelihood. They're experiencing all the same stress as everybody else in the world is experiencing, and they tend to manifest it more, and they're more likely to have hair trigger responses to seemingly minor stimuli or communications. So just giving yourself just a little extra room when you're interacting with folks, which we should all be for the decrease of the virus anyhow. But anticipating people reacting louder and stronger than they might normally is just good safety precaution.
Yeah, I guess there's more kind of a higher chance of someone reacting, outwardly because of general stresses. And I know myself, just anytime I've had to go out and do something, I've felt the, more stressed about a regular activity, that even would seem,
absolutely,
meaninless normally. Like, wow, normally I'm buying food and this is not a big deal, but now everything.
Or filling up with gas. It's like, okay, so how do I protect myself from whoever touched the keypad on the credit card thing and the gas handle pump, and there's somebody at the pump across from me, and that's like 4 feet apart, so I should give them space so they fill up before I go in to fill up. I mean, everyday activities take on a whole new meaning during this time.
Yeah, and that's why I could see if something's not going right about you're filling up your gas or your grocery shopping, if there's like something in the way or someone's acting strange and it's causing a delay, that I could see that stress building very quickly, because then everyone's agitated because they want to get it over with as quick as possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I saw a webinar you did for first responders a few days ago, and one of the topics, kind of concepts you had, was the crisis rehearsal concept. How is that? Could you explain that for listeners and how it could be beneficial for law enforcement at this time?
Absolutely. Actually, I learned, I initially introduced to the concept of crisis rehearsal back in the late 1980s when I attended one of the original Caliber Press street survival seminars that Denny Anderson and Chuck Remsburg and the folks at Caliber Press put on. And I think it was Grossman, who was the instructor, kind of talked us through the benefits of mentally rehearsing getting through circumstances. And there's some interesting research. Most of the research has actually been done with sports teams, where they had a group of divided the group in half and had half of them practice basketball and shooting baskets for a half hour every afternoon. And the other group, they had sit quietly, close their eyes, and mentally rehearse shooting baskets from different places on the court, but all in their mind without actually touching a basketball. And after doing this for a few weeks, they had both of the groups out playing, and the group that had just visualized and hadn't touched a basketball scored just as many baskets as the ones that had been and practicing for real. And since then, this concept of crisis rehearsal has been used to train surgeons in surgery, of thinking through a surgical procedure and imagining something bad happening, an artery accidentally getting lacerated, or some other bad problem happening to the patient, how they would how they would recover. And in the law enforcement sense, it's thinking through potential situations you run across where you are doing a pat down on a subject, and in the process of the pat down, feel a pain in your hand, and realize that the person you're searching has got a hypo that is used in their pocket because they're an IV drug user, and you've just gotten a solid poke from that. It's like, okay, that hurts. That puts what exactly are my actions going to be when that happens to me? Or you are in the process of restraining a subject, and you lose control of your weapon, and somebody who is a bystander picks up your weapon and threatens you with it while you're still trying to restrain the subject. Just thinking through those situations. The key to crisis rehearsal is to fully imagine the bad situation, whatever it happens to be, and then think of your various options for getting out of things successfully. The most important thing is to always rehearse winning, rehearse success, rehearse survival, rehearse getting through it successfully. And I've been using this technique since I first learned it, and and every once in a while, life will hand you a circumstance that is very similar to something that you have rehearsed. I had rehearsed situations with friends of mine who were shot in the middle of a firefight, and I stuck trying to extricate them, and I had that exact call with an officer down, and while holding cover behind a large apartment complex, trying to get an assessment of what happened. Watched a friend of mine, Sergeant Sampson, take a double-aught buck shotgun blast to the chest, and dropped down next to the officer that he was trying to get to, and we were able to, with the SWAT team and the fire department and my paramedic partner and myself, effect an extrication strategy pretty quickly. We were able to execute and be able to execute both, or extract both downed officers without anybody else getting injured, except for eventually the assailant. And there's something about having rehearsed bad situations that gives you a whole lot more emotional control and lower stress when bad situations actually happen. And even if the thing you're rehearsing isn't what you're experiencing, just training your mind and your neurologic system that you're cool and you can survive and get through any circumstance that you're faced with, I think really decreases your stress and improves your safety when you're dealing with difficult situations. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's great. So you mentally visualize maybe a worst case scenario, and
Yep.
that way when it actually if it actually appears, you've already gone through it in your mind how you're reacting and how you're going to try to solve the problem and succeed in doing it. So
Absolutely.
that's I feel like, yeah, for sports or for other I guess stressful activities, it's like you could think like a stand-up comedian being confident that their joke will work, where they've never told it
Exactly.
before on a stage or something like that.
Right.
So it's I could see that, yeah, it's just being, you're already comfortable enough in the scenario, as opposed to just trying to get your bearings when you don't know what to do.
Absolutely. Even if that exact scenario doesn't show up, it's that the programming and practice of crisis rehearsal just makes you better at dealing with anything, whether it has anything to do with the actual facts of what you've rehearsed or not.
Right. Yeah. So this pandemic scenario, it has the potential to drag on for a long time. What are the possible effects of the long-term kind of heightened stress on people working in law enforcement, other first responders having to go to work every day with this kind of working around people who are in a state of heightened stress?
So that's a great question, and the reality is everybody who's an essential worker in the world is experiencing greater stress than everybody else, and everybody else is experiencing higher stress, and so there are various responses. So there are people who experience stress and just suffer with it, and just grit their teeth and go through it, and are worried pretty much the entire time they're out at work, and still worrying when they're home, and do nothing to manage their stress effectively. And for those folks, stress, has powerful impacts on your body at the cellular level. It creates inflammation. It creates oxidative stress. There are parts of your cells that are basically the end caps on our DNA that are related to disease and aging, that the stress will have impact on, and it sets you up for high blood pressure, heart disease, strokes, any one of 100 autoimmune diseases. It increases the likelihood of depression, anxiety, acquiring post-traumatic stress disorder. So ongoing, long-term, chronic, what we would call threat stress, takes its toll emotionally and physiologically, and everybody's a little bit different around it. But people who have really high baseline resilience overall, and or folks that actively practice managing their stress by, whether it's having a daily mindfulness practice, getting some exercise, getting some food that is not processed and it does not have high sugar added to it, that they control their use of alcohol or tobacco or any other substances, and have some instant calming technique at their availability. They can really dial down their stress response, decrease all the negative potential impacts, and potentially come out the other side of this even stronger than when they went into it. A differentiation between what's called challenge stress and threat stress. Threat stress is more that fearful, I'm going to die, anxiety, panic kind of aspect of things, and that's the one that really causes the damage. Challenge stress is that hey, I've got somebody bigger than me that needs to be taken into custody, and you have that sense inside where it's like, I'm going to make this happen. This person is going to end up in handcuffs and I'm not going to be injured in the process. And that challenge stress actually builds your resilience. It nurtures your cells. It nurtures your psyche. So the more that you can look at it and say, I've got to, my challenge is to spend my day and keep my hands washed, never touch my face without clean hands and those kinds of things. The more you can have things be experienced as a challenge and transform what might be a little bit of a fear response into a little bit of excitement. I'm excited that I'm able to serve my community when other people can't. The more you can do that for yourself, the healthier you will be, both physically and psychologically, through this and on the other side of it.
Well, that's all really a good, inspiring advice. Mike, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast, and hopefully we all come out of this on the other side, like you said, stronger than before.
Absolutely, and I want to say in closing, please wash your hands, and remember what you do every day matters all the time, and it matters more today through this crisis. And I respect you and thank you all for what you do.
This has been the Prepared Warrior Podcast. For more info on our guests or other episodes, check out thepreparedwarrior.com. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas for the Prepared Warrior Podcast, email jon@thepreparedwarrior.com.